All right, guys. I really appreciate everyone taking the time today. I'm going to ask the treasurer to take the roll.
Mr. Peretti?
Here.
Mr. Brown?
Here.
Ms. Zeranin?
Yes.
Ms. Hudson?
Here.
Mr. Jordan?
Here.
Mr. Miller?
Here.
And Mr. Stewart is in absentia.
Absolutely. All right. Well, real quick, I'm going to go over the agenda. We had discussed last month a few other items that would be coming down the way, and just as we got kind of closer to this month, working through a few things with the contract, we wanted to make sure that we sort of took our time with this, make sure things were reflective in an accurate way. Didn't want to make assumptions and put anything in there that we weren't really entirely sure. And as everyone knows and has read, we did get an offer from our teachers union, and so we will be discussing that at the second, if everyone's available, the second meeting, which is you sometimes do have for this, just in cases like this, for the 5-year forecast. I think September 26th, correct?
To
And
Tuesday as well.
the Tuesday. That's when we'll kind of get into the 5-year forecast, kind of discuss that for the board's approval in October. We also discussed originally having the facilities operating budget sort of happening this month, but just a lot of sort of things going on. I wanted to make sure we were taking priorities and things that we had to make sure we did first, and we're going to do that in October. We're also discussing having the City of Columbus come in November, Mr. Steve Shomi, and kind of go over his presentation of the abatement and tax incentive program that they have been sort of giving around the city. It's very helpful. It explains a lot of things about abatements and incentives that are currently going on, does a really good job of sort of debunking some of those myths that are sort of revolving around that. So I thought they would come in November. So that's sort of looking like the next sort of 2 months. We will have the facilities operating budget, which I'm really excited about. That's going to be a really good piece for us. So I do apologize for that. I do thank you all for really keeping flexible with us, making time to come here. And for the new members, you guys have just been fantastic. I really just appreciate you taking so much time to help us out here and giving your insight to this. It's invaluable. So on the agenda, you'll see that we'll approve the minutes quickly. We're going to go over July and August's monthly financial report. And then we also have another item, superintendent search professional services contract. We have in our policies, if money, and correct me if I'm wrong, if it's shifts from one line item to another line item, this committee now hears it. And it's a way that we sort of changed the way that we budgeted, but it's just a good transparent piece for us to have the finance committee sort of understand sort of what's going on with that. And this is just sort of shifting the money from one item to the other, because I do believe it was in the board.
This one's an increase.
This one's an increase.
Right.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So that'll be real quick, and the treasurer and Mr. Gooden will be able to discuss that. And that'll be it today. As you know, we do have a 5 o'clock meeting that we'll need to get into, and that was another reason why to keep this meeting quick as we go into executive session today. So real quick, you'll see that we all, in our packets of information, you'll see the minutes from the last meeting, and everyone would look at those real quick. Don't see any concerns or changes. I'd like to motion for their approval. Move. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those in favor or opposed, same sign. All right, minutes are approved. And we'll now kick it off over to the treasurer to go over the July and the August 2017 monthly financial reports.
Okay, thank you. We'll do a little background to start off with on how this is put together. First, the monthly financial report packet that was available online. I don't know whether you were able to access it on Board Docs, but that's how we disseminate that. So I typically, when I make the Board Docs meeting live, I send the link out to everyone, and you can go there, click on the meeting on the left-hand side, open it up, view the agenda, and then you scroll down through it and can pick usually there are attachments on there that will show all of that. My monthly financial report that's before you tonight, really it's comprised of 2 sections, if you will. One is the management discussion and analysis that's on top, which is my discussion of the variances and things that I see that went on in the current month. And it's just, when we began this, I would do that verbally, and some folks says, could you write that down. And that's in essence what I did there. Behind that, the last 4 pages are 2 reports, one for July and one for August, to share with you. They are what I call the green bar reports, and this analysis today will stick pretty much with August on a year-to-date basis, but I did want you to see the July piece. So as we put this together, one of the underpinnings to this is a month-to-month plan, and we have spent time discussing how did we put that plan together. The first is, what do you choose as your overall target? We typically we're putting this together after we've adopted a May forecast, and then we do an appropriation resolution for the current fiscal year, and then we're in the middle of preparing the October forecast as we are now, and we tend to blend those together to try and get the best numbers we can as an indicator of where we believe revenues and expenditures will be for the current fiscal year. Then we spread that month to month. Heretofore, we've used the previous year's percent to total month to month as the best indicator, unless we knew of some reason why that wasn't appropriate. And sometimes, quite frankly, the variances that occur are just timing variances. Something happens in September and we plan for it in October, or vice versa, based upon the previous year. This time, when we sat down to do it, and I say we because I work with Scott and Mike on this as well as we pull it all together, we went back and collected data back 5 years. So it'd be fiscal 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17. Took a look at those percentages, looked for anomalies. For instance, last year we had a 3-pay year, so the percentages for 17 are not applicable. So we did just ignore those and then figure out what the average percentage was for expenditures in a normal year when you have a 3-pay month, and align those, because this year I believe it's December and June. And we went to other line by line and looking at those behaviors over that 5-year period and used an average or blended percentage for the month to month. Hopefully that will tend to take out some of the, just smooths out that timing. That hopefully now what we see in the plan is representative of what we've done on average over the last 4 to 5 years. But we'll still get some variances that, because of the actual data, it creates anomalies. And when you get a chance to read my notes, there are, I think, at least 2 areas where, as I prepared the notes, my comments, I mentioned, you know what, I did find another anomaly in one of the years that threw off those percentages, so we may want to adjust the plan to reflect that, but just keep that in mind. The plan totals that we're using are my preliminary run of the October forecast, which Mr. Peretti just mentioned. We're not ready to really release and discuss yet, because we're waiting for this other salary and wages issue to be resolved so that we can plug those numbers in. So this plan will change here in the next month, but for these purposes, we put that straw man out there to compare to. So on the report, you'll see month to date, what we currently estimate and what we currently receive for that month and a variance. Then you look at the year to date column, same data, what we've estimated year to date through the period, in this particular case, August, what we actually received in the variance. And then we have what the October forecast would look like, the total plan based upon that forecast. There are some differences there, primarily due to rounding, but I did want to list that. We're actually thinking also about adding a column here for our appropriation resolution, so that you can see if there are some movements in the appropriation resolution that would then differ from the plan and the forecast, that might explain some variances as well. We have a percent of variance from plan, and then I added a column for how much of our plan have we either received or expended, just to give you an idea where we are in the year. So that's how we prepared this document, and as we go through it, I'll do some highlights. Highlights of what's actually in the notes. For year-to-date through August, We have a situation of revenues over plan and expenditures just ever so slightly under plan. The revenues are about 18 million, I believe it is, over plan. And expenditures don't even register on the percent variance because it's so small. We're within 251,000. And of course, that drives our cash balance up on an expected basis. When we look into the categories of revenue, I'll say that property tax revenues appear to be up. This is a category where we may have some issues with the percent timing because calendar year 17 was the first year we collected new revenues. And so fiscal year 17 represents half of that new collection. And so it may distort our monthly percentages a little bit. So we may want to go back and pull that out. So don't get excited by the up 12 million variance. It's probably a plan issue, not that we've miscalculated revenues. And through conservative forecasting and planning, the typical results from our perspective, from the finance perspective, is that revenues will be slightly above plan because we've been conservatively estimating them, and expenditures would be slightly below plan, again, due to conservatively forecasting them. So that by the end of the year that we have a favorable or a gain in cash balance from what we expected rather than a decline. That's the finance accounting people, that's the way we like to do planning. So property taxes are up. State aid's right on plan. State aid, it comes in semi-monthly payments. Currently, what we're receiving is based upon last year's enrollment data. That won't be updated until probably October. And so we'll see how well that works itself out. I don't even know what that number may be at this point. But since we are very, very close to plan, you'll see in the notes, the management discussion and analysis, what the prediction is on a monthly basis, and you'll see that it ticks up in October. This is one of the, well, I'm sorry, never mind. Okay, so that's state aid. So it's right on target. It'll be adjusted in October. Yes.
What is this? I'm not sure. I understand after the October in the MD&A analysis, this recalculation issue.
The one that I mentioned about back in March of 15. If you recall, back in March of 15, they were.
I don't remember March of 15.
Okay, March of 15 was the period of time where ODE was very, very, very late in plugging in data.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And that's when our economically disadvantaged aid skyrocketed. And that's also, that necessarily drove up our charter school, community school deduction. And it happened in March, and all of a sudden, April, May, and June, the deducts changed our month. And what happened was the revenue calculation went up, but because we're capped, we didn't get any more. But that's when that charter school number went up, because the children became, there were more dollars attached to those children leaving the district.
Yeah.
And when I was looking at this, I noticed that distortion and went, and looked back, and it's one that I missed when I did the original spending plan. So we'll probably go back and adjust for that and smooth it out, because that shouldn't happen that way this year.
Okay.
Okay?
So they'll use those adjusted numbers, but they will be across the board, not.
Well, they should put them in October.
Yeah.
And after that, it should stay relatively smooth.
Okay.
There'll be some variance month to month, but it should be a lot smoother than what the heck happened back in March of 15. As you can see, if I'm doing a 5-year average, that behavior in 15 was so dramatically different that it distorted a 5-year average pretty significantly.
Yeah.
And I just didn't see it until I started writing the numbers. Okay?
Yep.
Nothing going on in restricted federal grants, but that's what we call the QSCUBI reimbursement. Qualified school construction bonds where the federal government allows you to borrow money and reimburses you for the interest expense. This is one of the line items that has to do with debt service that really doesn't run through the general fund, but we have to reflect it here. So you get us bringing in revenue bringing in revenue from the debt service fund, on top, and then you'll see later that there's a whole debt service related section in the expenditures down below. But they're not really running through the general fund. For a spending plan, they want it to be general fund related. Generally, it comes in and goes out at pretty much the same level, but that's just the way they have us do the forecast, and the way since I align the monthly report with the forecast, I want to make, we have to do it that way. But there's no activity on that until later in the year. Again, that one became one that the average activity over time is not a good indicator of what will happen, because we get it in 1 or 2 payments. As you look at the graph, it looks like it's coming in sporadically throughout the whole year. Another one I didn't see before I got into looking at the actual graph and writing the notes, so we may want to adjust that. It'd be a matter of picking a month what we think is going to come in. You just never know. Property tax allocation, that's the 10% and 2.5% rollback and homestead exemption. It's also where we post the state reimbursement for our loss of tangible personal property taxes, and there's really no activity in that area yet. That should come in September. All other items here, other revenue items, Medicaid reimbursement, tuition fees, some of the property tax direct payments to us from settlements, property tax cases are all recorded here. Again, we don't know the good true timing of it. Witness the fact that we got $1.5 million income tax sharing payment from the city of Columbus in July that was earlier than what we received previously. So that's just a timing issue. There's nothing noteworthy about other sources, the final line in revenue, because that's where the advances and transfers occur. Usually they're either debt service related, or they're dependent upon the need for cash and other funds. And that stays, it's fairly predictable, but again, right now what you see is just a timing variance, and it's not a significant revenue item. So that's revenues. And moving on to expenditures. You see that right now the personnel line is running slightly under plan by about 2.8 million, 3% under. July and August are run out from the previous fiscal year in terms of what we're paying for teachers and classified individuals that are on what we call stretch pay. You work over 9 months, but you get paid over 12. Beginning in September, everybody's on a new salary schedule, if there is one, and new personnel are starting, so we'll see how September works itself out. So this will be one of the lines that we adjust once we get negotiations completed. We track purchase services, we split it out, charter versus non-charter, because charter and STEM and scholarships are such a big number. And you can see here we're pretty much on target purchase services. While it's 6% over on $9.5 million, I think that'll work itself out. Charter schools right on target. Again, that will be a line item that gets adjusted in October, when they begin to roll that current year data in. And after October, I believe they update enrollment like all the time. Right. And so that's how we get different calculations to us mid-month. Every time we get a payment, those calculations can move. But so far, what we've estimated versus how it's coming in, it looks pretty good to be on target. Supplies and materials running under. Capital outlay is up. I think I mentioned here about in capital outlay. I don't know. I don't know that I identified a specific item in capital outlay. Keep in mind too, on all the non-personnel items, purchase services, supplies, materials, capital outlay, they are controlled by appropriation. So if we appropriate $1 million in a line, that's all that can be spent there. And while I might plan to spend it month to month in one fashion, if it goes out faster than we anticipate, and nobody changes the appropriation, they can't spend more. So if it gets accelerated, the spending pattern is accelerated, I know full well that that'll work itself out unless they modify the appropriation resolution. And that's why I think on the Green Bar report, if I put in the appropriation resolution there, we would see any movement in between object codes that might indicate that there's going to be a change in that pattern.
And is that one, is this, would this be a capital project that started sooner than expected?
It's not really capital project, it'll be equipment.
Oh.
It'll be equipment that, and it could be an order that came over from last year and was paid this year, that you just never know when those are going to come through. They ordered it and wasn't fulfilled by the end of the fiscal year. We carried over and then we paid the bill. But we can check that out. You may see it come back into shape just next month. And again, some of this data is almost better to look at on a quarterly basis, so some of those timing issues work themselves out. But we keep our eyes on it. I don't know that there was anything particular in capital outlay to jump it up, but we'll take a look.
Mr. Treasurer?
Yes.
I know we've talked about supplies and material a few times and trying to understand that behavior of that and how it's sort of difficult to sort of focus in on the month to month and exactly what's going on. And, you know, the amount of money that it is really is a small amount. But are we still sort of diving into supplies and material a little bit to sort of understand that behavior?
When we're trying to discern if there's a consistent pattern of not spending what's been budgeted,
Okay.
which would cause us to change the plan.
Mm-hmm.
But it also has an impact that when they do a 5-year budget,
Yeah.
that's their 5-year budget. And if they consistently underspend it, we have to look at the reasons behind that.
And real generally, what items are sort of made up in that line item? Is this like supplies for classrooms and things like that?
Instructional supplies, office supplies, bus fuel.
Bus fuel?
Bus fuel's a big one.
Okay. Because you just hear, and this is a real general question, you know, and you know, with a lot of things, you have to understand both sides of it. You always hear a lot of people talking about material in classrooms, you know, how people are needing more things, don't have supplies. So I think it would just be good to maybe, at some point, if we could sort of talk to on the operations end of just to understand that more and, you know, what's really there, what's not really there, and what's actually being really reflected in the classroom so that we understand sort of this a little bit more, because no one wants, you know, classrooms not to have material and things like that.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that we do provide that, but maybe from my understanding, you know, what do we start with? What's it really look like? And how is this reflective of that? That would be helpful for me.
And internally, we've changed some of the reporting that we're doing,
Mhm.
because a lot of times, and this is kind of part of why, you know, how we changed our whole budget process, is that there were two separate things going on, and you would build a budget, you'd spend everything, and then at the end of the year, well, hey, Stan, you overspent your budget.
Yeah.
At that point, it's too late. What are you going to do
Yeah.
about it? So now we're looking at it on a quarterly basis and breaking that down. Everybody's looking at their reports. What we did at the end of the year was a lot of times not just saying, hey, you overspent your budget. We're also forcing people to look at, you really underspent this particular line item
Mhm.
by a lot.
Mhm.
You know, in things that Mary Jo's talked about, you know, was there something that we planned on doing that we didn't do?
Mhm.
So we're putting that back on them and saying, here's the areas that we see some significant discrepancies.
Mhm.
What happened? Did you move the money somewhere else? What changed from that original plan? And having them look at that piece. Because a lot of times it's always, hey, you went over in this line, don't do it again. But we're
Mhm.
trying to make sure that we
Yeah.
balance that out a little bit.
Scott, does questioning folks about that, is it done in a way that doesn't incentivize them to go spend just because it's in their budget and they're going to have to explain it?
Well, since I'm the one questioning, I think so. I don't think that, you know, we have not seen anything. When we look at our deadlines for when purchasing gets cut off, one of the things I've always called is like your spring spending spree. Because people will see, it's that silo mentality that, hey, I've got my operating budget, I've got $50,000 left, I'm gonna spend it so that I don't lose my money. Well, we talk about it in the broader picture that, well, if you don't spend that money, now that's the $50,000 that we're going to be able to invest in this social emotional program for our students. It's bigger than that. It's going to help the year-end balances, all those kinds of things. Because I've also seen, not this district, but former districts, that you may have a building secretary that did that and ordered colored construction paper that was orange. And when you come back 5 years later, that's still
It's
sitting
still
in the
sitting
copy
there.
room, it's no longer orange, it's yellow. So we're trying to get through that so they could see the big picture, so that we can reinvest that in other areas. But by moving to a very, almost that hybrid zero-based model and doing it over a 5-year period, they're itemizing out what they want to do. So we'll see those things if they pop up.
And would it be too much micromanaging? Would the high level be able to, would we be able to notice that, see sort of large balances and ask questions before they go and spend these things? Like, is there a way that we'd be able to sort of maybe correct that behavior that you don't want to see, sort of towards the end of the year?
Yeah, I mean, we see that when we're looking at the monthly items, and you won't see it in the reports here, but we're looking at the supplies by the
But if we
three-digit
see
object,
something
where those
like,
are
hey,
moving.
principal, whomever, we see that you haven't really spent a lot of this, sort of what's going on, what are you doing with it, or what are you not doing with it, and, we don't want you to do the orange construction paper sort of
Right.
thing.
Well, yeah, because I just think we can't be, like, continue to have a surplus on the line when you have teachers setting up GoFundMe accounts for school supplies.
Right.
And so it just, like, we should always be, like, in a deficit on that line, I think. Because we should always be doing more than what we say we're gonna do,
Then
not
you
the
should
other way.
take the fuel out, because that is so hard to predict.
Yeah.
And it was funny, because I was just going to mention bus fuel, because that's one
pull that
piece
out.
we've looked at, what the budget has historically been set at, and we've typically come in under by about, $1.5, $2 million. So we looked at that and we went, okay, well, we've been under. So let's take that and lower the numbers that you had, even though we had a
That's a great
5-year
point,
plan.
Judy.
Year 2, we don't need year 2, so we're gonna bump that down. So we made adjustments when we looked at those big variances. Bus fuel was one, for example. That was a big one.
But I think what Board Member Brown mentioned was kind of the use it or lose it mentality.
Yeah.
And that's not how we budget, but we do have a discussion that you look at a history of, well, you budgeted this, but you spent that, so apparently you don't need that much. What we don't do is say, we're going to base next year's budget on what you spent this year. That would create the splurge spending at the end of the
Perverse
year.
incentive.
Yeah, I need
Yeah,
more.
and so we don't incentivize folks that way. We say, give us your budget, and then we go back and assess how are they doing against that budget. And we can, Scott can certainly break it down. School budgets, which, not that the other supply items don't go to the classroom, but school budgets definitely do go into the classroom versus departmental budgets and supplies like that. Supplies and, if I had to spend my supply line, nobody's going to do a GoFundMe account for that, okay? That's not the critical part. But we can differentiate that. And did you mention the word micromanage? Yeah. I think the next level of information to see is really to look at it at a more micro level.
Yeah.
We can do that, that's fine, we can talk about that
Well, it's just one of those
all day,
issues that
yeah.
in the school district, you hear about it a lot.
Yeah.
And although it's a very small line item, it's one of those things that are sort of emotionally sort of connected
Yeah.
to that
Well, let's see what the
people
data
understand.
says.
Yeah.
Let's see what the data says and see if it,
It can be a daily
historically
irritant
supports
to
that.
a teacher or whatever.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay? I think that pretty much covers it as far as significant items for through August. So as long as, if you guys, folks can get to this data, the new, on board docs for you new folks,
We have any trouble
No.
getting on board
No, I
docs?
got on yesterday.
good. And I changed the layout for those of you who've been here before. I changed the layout a little bit. It's got a little bit more information on it. I dropped all the prior year stuff because we've never really talked about it, and the prior year is what drives the monthly plan, so it's reflected there. Anyway, so hopefully this is becoming incrementally more usable
Oh, it absolutely
as
is.
time goes by. So that's the report for July and August. this will be delivered to the board. The good news for the board members is we are finished with the report. There are only 7 slides, 4 of which are redundant. 2 of them started and 2 of them ended. I think there's really only 3 slides in my report with any data on it. So I know brevity is directly related to, I don't know, perhaps compensation?
Oh,
I don't know. Board president?
I know that we'll have, it's one of those things that there might be less pain now, there'll be a lot more later.
Yeah. That's it for, yes.
Just a quick question. In understanding various line items and what that number actually refers to, I don't even know, I guess I haven't spent enough time online, but can somebody look at the line item and is there a full explanation of what's contained in a line item there?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
we know what's in every line item, and we could, maybe just from a definitional standpoint, sometime bring in, an explanation of what goes in. I mean, we could present to you all of that detail and show you
He's
how.
talking about the public.
I'm talking about the
open
public
check
website.
Oh, I
or
thought it was for your edification.
No, I know that you know what it is.
You mean like in our
Digital dashboard.
like Jody mentioned, our online checkbook,
Yeah.
our transparency site?
Yeah.
Yeah, they can, since you can drill down to,
Mm-hmm.
vendor payments, you can tell what's in all of the data that's out there.
As the expenses
So
are occurring.
when we group them by what we call object, purchase services, supplies and materials, you can drill down into there and see
Exactly
Exactly
what the
what's been-
definition is for any particular line.
you would derive that from actually looking at the transactions and some of the titles of the lines. I was thinking more in terms of a kind of a glossary, if you will.
Use estimate.
Yeah, kind of a use estimate. This line has these, and maybe
Isn't
that
there-
would help if
isn't
we
there
went
still
through
a,
went through the forecast and said.
Isn't there still a definitions document
Use
off of the,
manual.
ODE thing that Mac would crosswalk to these,
Yeah.
right? That's a pretty, it's a pretty high level of in 1.01, this is what this is.
How to read 5-year forecast.
Yeah,
That'll be in my notes.
yeah, I was gonna say, maybe just drop that in there, that way you can cross-reference it real easy.
Okay.
I'd love
You don't have
that.
to,
I'd
you don't have
love
to
that
create
document.
any, you don't have to create anything.
Do you have any more questions on the monthly financials? No. All right, we move on to item 4, our superintendent search professional services contract. You'll also see in your packet information, our budget request for executive search form. And again,
Yep. As Chair Peretti mentioned earlier, this form is where if we make any adjustments from my budget to Stan's budget or something like that, if we're moving money from one to another, we bring that here. This is obviously something that was not anticipated when we built the budget in the first half of the calendar year. So this is a request for an increase to the Board of Education's budget that coincides with the executive search contract that the board approved at the last board meeting for $50,000. And I'm going to get the name wrong, but Dr. Roush is here to put that together, so I thought.
Hazard Young, Atia and Associates was the name of the firm. Thank you, Dr. Gooding. The board, their meeting on the 5th of September, went through 3 interviews of 3 different firms. I think they had an hour each to present and have a Q&A, and then an hour. It just felt like an hour. The board then scored those, and then based upon the objective scoring, Hazard Young was the firm selected. The board voted at that meeting and to select Hazard Young. The document in front of you and the request is to increase that line item, that appropriation authority, to cover the cost of that. Hazard Young, their base is $35,000. There's then the addition of the background checks that cost you some extra, and then there's some additional services that are also available. So we built that should the board choose to avail themselves of any of those additional services as well. If you look at the overall budget, $123,000 is about what the board has in its entire budget, and this is obviously a very large. There's no way that they can just absorb the $50,000 in existing funds.
In other words, we didn't anticipate the expense
We did not
this year.
anticipate the expense this year. I don't believe any of us anticipated the expense this year. Dr. Good certainly made his announcement in August, well after the fiscal year begun.
And where does the money, what line item does the money come from to fill this in?
It'll just be an increase to the appropriation.
Okay. And this is just an enhancement that we did. We moved to this budgeting system. That way we keep on top of this, it keeps the money transparent, and it was just another sort of safety check. And when we first did this, we were a little concerned that we would have this come up more often, and I think this is maybe the second or third time that we've,
Just the
second time that we've actually had to come back here and go through this process. Just
3 years.
short
3 years.
Yeah,
3 years.
so it's been very successful, and
It's really good.
it only happens a few times, but like I said, it's just always good to be, above the line and accountable for
So let me
this.
make sure I understand. I mean, I know Dr. Good is retiring, but is this $123,000 the increase that you're requesting or not?
The increase, the request for the increase is $50,000. The current budget is $123,000.
Okay.
That's the current budget.
And the timetable that's in here, looks like we're, not that there's anything tight to it, but it is, we're kind of in that, where it says phase 2 already, that's not really what's happened yet. It's,
So I believe, if I'm not mistaken, so the board has selected the firm. I believe that they actually.
So they've-
On the 19th. So we have some existing funds we were able to start the contract. with.
gotcha, okay.
So we were able to start the contract with some existing funds, but we will expend those funds in very short time.
Gotcha, okay.
We're right now going more on our good looks and credit.
For Tom, we're good for it.
Depends on-
Thomas, we're good for it.
You know where to find us if you.
They're going on
If they don't
faith.
vote this, we'll pass the operating plan.
That's our sense of urgency.
Yeah.
What we did ask, and in their proposal, they had, and most of these firms, they do flat fee, which includes background checks
Right.
and that sort of thing, plus some travel expenses. They have an Ohio contact, but then they also, some of their folks are
Nationally.
all over the country. So there will be some additional expenses beyond the fee. Does this constitute the fee? Was there a fee 50? I
So
don't
the fee was
remember.
35, and then
Yeah.
you got some mileage, and then I think that there's some additional, you get the mileage travel fees
Oh,
that
right.
you have to incur.
Then- and then the
there's some
background.
background check
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
fees that are on top of that. And so, and then there's some optional fees should the board choose to avail themselves later on. You'll have
There was some
of that there
advertising.
should you choose
So
to.
there are a couple different packages. which We
Correct.
will talk to them about where they list the position, and how they get the word out.
Right.
And I think we want to make sure we at least from just my personal perspective, they don't skimp on the background check, so.
Well, it's not just people who are answering an ad, it's they're going out and maybe cultivating some of those
That's
interested
correct, yeah.
people, right?
And that's the firms we spoke with, they're firms that
That do that.
do that regularly.
Yeah.
And they know where to
They
go
know where to-
advertise, they know where to position the posting.
Superintendent
they-
monthly.
So I mean, I would imagine there's a
What
place
pond
where-
they're
Well,
fishing in.
yeah, but I think it's, and
Superintendent
we, it's also, they do their networking and have a network of folks that they're headhunters, so.
Yeah. It's
that's-
executive search.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Good. So it was a interesting process.
Well,
We
the
had,
firm's
I
pretty
think we had
close.
seven or eight proposals, President Baker, and then called those down through the board review, and then we had 3 firms that came in and interviewed, and then we scored those and then came up with this one. So we did it we wanted to accelerate it so that the selection was just after Dr. Good's departures at the end of this calendar year, so that the selection would coincide with that as close as we can if possible.
And where are they based out of?
Chicago.
Yeah, and they've done some work previously for the district. Stan
They've done some
was Stan's
excellent.
search
You
was done.
found Stan?
Yeah,
All
Stan. I know.
I'm not sure about this.
Call
one.
that off.
I'm just saying.
They were good to work with.
That's good.
All right, any more questions, comments on this? Well, then do we put a motion forward to accept this and move it to the, does it have to go to the board, or is it just go to the finance committee? I forget.
It'll come to the board, and it's part of the amended appropriations.
Okay.
So that's on there for Tuesday night.
So then make a motion then to.
Recommendation.
A recommendation to approve this to move up to the board? That sound correct? Okay.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those not in favor, same sign. All right. Excellent. Brings us to the end. Thank you, Board Member Brown. This brings us to the end of the agenda for today. Again, I want to thank you. We will be meeting back together the 26th, like I said before, to begin the conversation, the 5-year forecast. And we'll see that again in May, as well as our team is starting to dig in now these next few months on putting together the budget for the 18-19 school year.
And we'll also see capital.
Oh yeah, we'll be
The
seeing
next one.
capital.
See, it'll be longer the next.
Yeah, it'll be a lot more fun, I promise. And so we'll see the capital operations, or facility operations budget coming forward next month. We'll also have the 5-year forecast will be behind us by then. That will be in October. Monthly financials, and then the following month, monthly financials, and the city of Columbus will come in and talk to us about the abatements and tax incentives. And we'll also, then into the new year, we'll start to have those budget conversations, some updates, maybe in November, sort of where we are, and start getting some information on our budget process. And then, we like to explore new things. So, always feel free to, bring up subjects that, you may be interested in and could discuss. That's what this is for. And that's where the facilities operating budget idea came from, was from this committee. So I always encourage that, just to ask questions, and what else we can look at is always welcome. Okay. Well, with that, I will
Motion to adjourn?
motion to adjourn. Second.
Aye.
All right.
Yes.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign.
Adjourn.
Thank you.
Adjourn. Thank you very much. I really
Good job.
appreciate everything.